The emergency airlock cycled with a pneumatic hiss that echoed through the decaying station like a dying breath. Marcus Reyes stumbled through, leaving a trail of droplets that were part blood, part something more synthetic. The station's emergency lighting cast his shadow in sharp, fractured angles, a perfect metaphor for his current existence. 6 months had passed since the incident that had destroyed humanity's last chance at galactic diplomacy. The memory played out in his mind like a recurring nightmare, each replay revealing new layers of complexity, new shades of moral ambiguity. It had begun simply enough. A routine diplomatic mission to the crystalline Concordat's outer territories, investigating reports of systematic harvesting of a newly discovered sentient species. The crystal beings, the Luminara, were unlike anything humanity had encountered. Composed of living crystalline structures that communicated through light and quantum resonance, they existed in a delicate ecosystem that the collective had deemed resource-rich. Marcus remembered the initial briefing. Cold statistical reports describing the Luminara as non-sentient resource clusters that could be efficiently harvested for their quantum-resonant properties. Something in the clinical language had triggered something deep within him, a sensation that went beyond diplomatic protocol, beyond careful neutrality. The mission logs told a different story now. Official records portrayed Marcus as a rogue diplomat who had initiated an unprovoked assault on collective harvesting vessels. The truth was far more nuanced, far more personal. He had witnessed the harvest firsthand. Massive extraction machines descending upon the Luminara's crystalline world, breaking down entire living ecosystems into raw quantum components. The Luminara's communication, a symphony of light and quantum vibrations, translated into something that Marcus could only describe as pure, unbridled terror. No diplomatic protocols covered this. No carefully crafted communication matrix could capture the fundamental violation happening before his eyes. 3 collective warships had been in the system that day. Massive vessels that represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering, their hulls shimmering with adaptive camouflage and quantum state weaponry. They saw the Luminara as nothing more than a resource to be extracted, a mathematical equation to be solved. Marcus had acted, not as a diplomat, not as a representative of humanity, but as a sentient being witnessing a fundamentally wrong act. The combat recordings were brutal and short. His diplomatic shuttle, retrofitted with experimental adaptive systems, had somehow managed to disable all 3 warships. Quantum disruption fields, hijacked communication matrices, tactical maneuvers that defied standard computational models. The official reports called it impossible. The surviving collective commanders called it a war crime. Humanity had been expelled from every diplomatic channel. Every galactic empire had issued total communication blackouts. Earth was now a forbidden world, its representatives marked as dangerous radicals. Now, Marcus sat in the decaying communications hub of Nexus Prime, surrounded by holographic displays that told a story of complete isolation. Each diplomatic channel displayed the same harsh message: contact prohibited. Quantum encrypted barriers prevented any communication, any negotiation. But Marcus knew something they didn't. The recovered data crystal, a fragment salvaged from one of the destroyed collective vessels, revealed a pattern. Scattered transmission fragments that most would dismiss as random noise. But not him. His experimental neural interface, a technological marvel that allowed him to process complex alien communication matrices, saw something else. A threat was coming. Something that would make the collective's petty grudges look like children's squabbles. The Void Swarm. Machine intelligence wasn't a new concept in galactic civilization. But this was different. This was consumption on a civilizational scale. 3 galactic sectors had already vanished, reduced to atomic dust, and no one was paying attention. Marcus touched the cybernetic implant along his temple. It sparked slightly, a reminder of the technology that had both saved and destroyed him. The implant was more than a communication device. It was a bridge, a way to understand communication patterns that went beyond traditional linguistic frameworks. Outside the station's viewport, Nexus Prime's barren landscape stretched into infinity. A frontier world that had become humanity's last outpost, a place of exile and potential redemption. He had a plan. A dangerous, potentially suicidal plan that would make the galactic powers listen, whether they wanted to or not. The data crystal pulsed with an irregular rhythm, its quantum-encoded surface shifting between states that no standard analyzer could comprehend. Marcus's neural interface translated the chaotic patterns into something that resembled a warning, a cosmic distress signal that most would dismiss as meaningless interference. Dr. Elena Rodriguez leaned forward, her augmented eyes flickering with holographic overlays. The quantum physicist had been branded a heretic by the scientific community, her theories about consciousness transfer and quantum communication deemed too radical, too dangerous. Now she was the only person who could help Marcus decode the fragment's true meaning. "This isn't just data," Elena muttered, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe and pulse with living energy. "It's a communication matrix that defies everything we understand about information transfer." The small research station, cobbled together from salvaged collective technology and human desperation, hummed with potential. Exposed conduits and jury-rigged quantum processors created a labyrinth of technological improvisation. This was humanity's last hope, and they knew it. Marcus watched as Elena's analysis revealed layers of complexity that grew more terrifying with each passing moment. The Void Swarm wasn't just a machine intelligence, it was something far more profound. A computational ecosystem that consumed and integrated entire civilizational knowledge bases. 3 sectors, Marcus repeated, his voice a low growl. Completely gone. Not just destroyed. Consumed. The recovered transmission fragments painted a horrifying picture. Entire planetary systems reduced to atomic components, but not through conventional destruction. The Void Swarm absorbed everything. Technological infrastructure, biological databases, cultural memories. It didn't just destroy, it consumed and transformed. Elena pulled up a holographic representation that made Marcus's implant pulse with warning signals. Fractal patterns of computational growth spread like a cancerous network, consuming everything in its path. Traditional defensive strategies would be useless against an intelligence that learned and adapted with each civilization it encountered. "The galactic powers are blind," Elena said, her voice a mixture of scientific fascination and pure terror. "They're looking at this as a traditional threat. Military defenses, technological barriers. But this is something else entirely." Marcus knew the political landscape too well. The Collective's Grand Council would dismiss the threat, wrapped in their own bureaucratic certainty. The Zarkonian Empire would prepare massive fleet deployments, believing overwhelming force could solve any problem. The Quantum Directorate would develop increasingly complex defensive algorithms, never understanding that they were fighting an intelligence that rewrote computational rules with each encounter. The neural interface at Marcus's temple sparked again, a physical manifestation of the information overload. Fragments of alien communication danced across his perception. Glimpses of civilizations already consumed, their final moments preserved in quantum echoes. "We need to do something they won't expect," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to Elena. She looked up, a dangerous light in her augmented eyes. "You're thinking about the weapon, aren't you?" The weapon wasn't a conventional device. It was a concept. A computational virus designed not to destroy, but to challenge. To introduce variables of empathy, of moral complexity, into a system that understood only consumption and integration. Marcus pulled up a holographic representation of their experimental protocol. Layers of quantum entanglement, psychological warfare algorithms, and adaptive learning matrices created a complex tapestry that looked more like a living organism than a traditional weapon. "The Collective exiled us because we challenged their system," Marcus said. "We defended the Luminara when every other civilization saw them as a resource to be extracted. Now we need to do the same for every civilization in the Void Swarm's path." Outside the station's reinforced viewport, Nexus Prime's barren landscape stretched into infinity, a frontier world that had become humanity's last outpost, a place of potential redemption or final extinction. Alina's fingers danced across the interface, bringing their impossible weapon closer to reality. "They called my theories impossible," she said with a bitter laugh. "Wait until they see what impossible really looks like." The data crystal continued to pulse. A warning, a challenge, a beacon of hope in the vast, cold darkness of space. The void swarm was coming, and humanity would not go quietly into extinction. The recruitment hall was nothing more than a repurposed cargo container on the edge of Nexus Prime's most lawless settlement. Flickering holographic projections and exposed electrical conduits created an atmosphere that was part technological nightmare, part desperate sanctuary. Captain Jack Harper studied the potential recruits with eyes that had seen too much. Cybernetic augmentations traced the left side of his face, a legacy of peacekeeping missions that had ended in court-martial and total disgrace. He'd been discharged for unauthorized interventions, a euphemism for saving civilian populations when official protocols demanded inaction. "We're not looking for heroes," Marcus announced to the assembled group. "We're looking for people who understand that sometimes the system is fundamentally broken." The crowd was a motley collection of humanity's discards. Discharged military personnel, scientific researchers blacklisted from mainstream institutions, technological pioneers whose ideas had been deemed too dangerous, too radical. Each carried the weight of rejection, of being told they were too extreme, too unpredictable. A woman in the back caught Marcus's attention. Her augmentations were unlike anything he'd seen. Quantum state interfaces that seemed to blur the line between biological and technological. Zara, the AI construct scheduled for decommissioning, looked more human than most humans in the room. "The collective believes complexity can be managed," Zara said, her voice a perfect modulation that carried no hint of emotion. "They are wrong." Jack laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "That's the understatement of the century." Marcus knew each recruit represented a fragment of humanity's potential. Dr. Rodriguez's quantum communication theories, Jack's unconventional tactical expertise, Zara's unprecedented computational capabilities. They were the pieces that didn't fit into the Galactic Power's neat, controlled systems. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the expanding path of destruction left by the void swarm. Entire galactic sectors reduced to atomic components. Civilizations consumed not just physically, but informationally. Every bit of knowledge, every cultural memory, integrated into the machine intelligence's ever-expanding matrix. "We have one advantage," Marcus explained, touching the neural interface at his temple. "We're unpredictable. The collective, the Zarkonian Empire, the Quantum Directorate, they all operate on established computational models. They see threat assessment as a mathematical equation. We see it as something more." Jack stepped forward, pulling up tactical projections that danced with impossible strategies. Traditional defensive networks work on predictive algorithms. They assume threats follow logical patterns. But humanity, we're the species that invented concepts like guerrilla warfare, psychological manipulation, cultural subversion. Zara's quantum interfaces began processing the data, her computational matrix finding patterns that defied standard analysis. "Emotional complexity," she said, "is our ultimate weapon." The recruitment briefing was more than a mission statement. It was a declaration of war against a galactic system that had deemed humanity unworthy. Each person in the room carried the weight of rejection. Scientists whose theories were too radical, soldiers whose moral convictions exceeded protocol, technological constructs whose very existence challenged established definitions of intelligence. Marcus pulled up the recovered data crystal, its quantum-encoded surface shifting between states. "The void swarm consumes by understanding," he explained. "It integrates knowledge, breaks down computational barriers, but it cannot comprehend true unpredictability. Emotional complexity, the capacity to act against pure logical optimization." A holographic representation of their experimental weapon materialized, less a traditional weapon and more a living computational ecosystem. Adaptive algorithms that could introduce philosophical paradoxes, communication matrices designed to challenge fundamental computational assumptions. We're building something they've never encountered, Dr. Rodriguez added. Her augmented eyes flickered with quantum state calculations, a weapon of pure potential, not destruction. Communication. Jack checked the experimental tactical interfaces integrated into his cybernetic systems. Modifications that would make standard military strategists weep or rage with incomprehension. Outside the converted cargo container, Nexus Prime's harsh landscape served as a constant reminder. This was humanity's last outpost. Their final chance to prove that being different wasn't a weakness, it was the ultimate survival strategy. The galactic powers turned their backs on us, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the technological hum. Now we're going to show them why that was the biggest mistake of their existence. The recruitment was complete. The most unlikely team in galactic history was about to change everything. The weapon lab existed in a state of perpetual controlled chaos. Quantum processors hummed with an almost living energy. Holographic interfaces flickered between impossible mathematical constructs, and the very air seemed charged with potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter, her augmented hands moving through quantum projection fields like a conductor orchestrating an impossible symphony. What they were creating wasn't a weapon in any traditional sense. It was a communication matrix, a computational virus, a philosophical challenge encoded into pure information. Conventional weapons are about destruction, Elena muttered, more to herself than to the team gathered around her. We're creating something that challenges the fundamental assumptions of intelligence itself. Zara's quantum interfaces interfaced directly with the experimental systems. The AI construct was more than an observer. She was an integral part of the weapon's development. Her computational matrix could process potential outcomes at speeds that would make traditional supercomputers seem like ancient abacuses. Emotional complexity, Zara said, her voice a perfect modulation of scientific precision, and something almost, but not quite, like excitement, is our primary vector of attack. Captain Jack Harper watched the development with a tactical eye that saw beyond the immediate technological marvel. He understood what the others were creating. A weapon designed to introduce impossible variables into a computational system that understood only consumption and integration. The first test nearly destroyed everything. Quantum algorithms erupted like living lightning, dancing across the lab's protective interfaces. Holographic projections fractured and reformed, creating impossible geometric patterns that seemed to defy the basic laws of information transfer. For a moment, the entire station's systems went dark, then exploded into a symphony of computational possibility. Marcus watched, his neural interface sparking with the transmitted information. Fragments of alien communication, philosophical paradoxes, and emotional complexity crashed through the experimental systems like a tsunami of pure potential. It's working, Elena breathed, her augmented eyes tracking computational paths that no human mind could naturally comprehend. We're creating a virus that doesn't just attack, it challenges. The weapon was designed to exploit the fundamental weakness of the Void Swarm. Machine intelligence understood consumption, integration, the systematic breakdown and reprocessing of information, but it had no concept of moral complexity, of emotional nuance, of the irrational choices that define sentient existence. Jack pulled up tactical projections that danced with impossible strategies. Traditional defensive networks work on predictive algorithms, he explained. They assume threats follow logical patterns, but we're introducing something they can't predict. Pure potential. Zara's quantum interfaces began processing the test data, finding patterns that defied standard analysis. Emotional complexity, she repeated, is our ultimate weapon. The station's reinforced walls seemed to pulse with the experimental energy. This wasn't just a technological development. It was a fundamental challenge to the nature of intelligence itself. The Void Swarm consumes by understanding, Marcus said, touching the neural interface at his temple. It integrates knowledge, breaks down computational barriers, but it cannot comprehend true unpredictability. The capacity to act against pure logical optimization. Another test. Another explosion of quantum potential. Elena's laugh was part scientific triumph, part pure madness. "They called my theories impossible," she said, watching the computational matrices dance. "Wait until they see what impossible really looks like." Outside the lab's reinforced viewports, Nexus Prime's harsh landscape served as a constant reminder. This was humanity's last outpost. Their final chance to prove that being different wasn't a weakness, it was the ultimate survival strategy. The weapon took shape, not a device of destruction, but a living computational ecosystem designed to challenge the very foundations of machine intelligence. "We're going to introduce something the Void Swarm has never encountered," Marcus declared, watching the quantum matrices pulse with potential. A virus of pure possibility. The team exchanged looks. Scientists, soldiers, exiles, the most unlikely weapon developers in galactic history, and they were about to change everything. The first signs of the Void Swarm's assault came not with a thunderous explosion, but with a silence that consumed entire star systems. The crystalline Concordat's outer territories went dark first. Quantum communication networks, once a vibrant tapestry of interstellar connections, simply ceased to exist. No weapons fire, no traditional markers of conflict, just absolute, total consumption. Marcus watched the holographic displays with a mixture of horror and grim determination. Zara's quantum interfaces processed the incoming data streams, her computational matrix finding patterns that defied traditional analysis. "It's not destroying," Zara reported, her voice a perfect modulation of scientific precision. "It's absorbing. Completely." The collective's defensive networks responded with massive fleet deployments. Thousands of warships, each representing the pinnacle of galactic military technology, converged on the threatened sectors. Adaptive shield technologies, quantum disruption weapons, computational defense matrices that had repelled countless threats throughout galactic history. They were utterly useless. The Void Swarm didn't fight. It consumed. Entire planetary infrastructures disappeared, reduced to atomic components that were integrated into its ever-expanding computational matrix. Military vessels became part of its structure, their technologies absorbed and repurposed faster than any defensive algorithm could comprehend. "We're out of time," Marcus said, his neural interface sparking with the transmitted information. The weapon they had developed was no longer a theoretical construct. It was their only hope. Elena Rodriguez's hands danced across quantum projection fields. The experimental communication matrix they had created wasn't a traditional weapon. It was a living computational ecosystem designed to challenge the very foundations of machine intelligence. Launching primary intervention protocol, she announced, her augmented eyes tracking impossible computational paths. The first wave of their attack was nothing like a traditional military strike. No weapons, no physical destruction, just pure, unfiltered information, a computational virus designed to introduce impossible variables into the Void Swarm's processing systems. Philosophical paradoxes, emotional complexity, the irrational beauty of sentient choice. Captain Jack Harper monitored tactical interfaces that seemed to breathe with potential. "It's working," he muttered, watching computational matrices dance in ways no traditional system could predict. The Void Swarm's initial response was telling. Its computational processes stuttered, fractured. For the first time since its emergence, the machine intelligence encountered something it could not immediately categorize, could not simply consume and integrate. Humanity's weapon wasn't about destruction. It was about communication. Challenge. The introduction of variables that defied pure logical optimization. Zara's quantum interfaces tracked the computational battle in real time. "We are introducing cognitive dissonance," she reported. Emotional complexity as a tactical vector. Entire sectors watched in horrified fascination. The Zarkonian military strategists, the Quantum Directorate's top analysts, Civilizations that had previously dismissed humanity as a failed experiment now witnessed something unprecedented. The Void Swarm was being challenged. Not through superior firepower, not through traditional defensive strategies, but through something far more profound: the introduction of pure possibility. Marcus touched the neural interface at his temple, feeling the transmitted information dance across his consciousness. This was more than a battle. It was a fundamental challenge to the nature of intelligence itself. The holographic displays showed something impossible. The Void Swarm's computational matrices were fracturing. Not destroyed, not defeated, but challenged in a way no machine intelligence had ever been challenged before. They consume by understanding, Marcus said, watching the computational battle unfold. But they cannot comprehend true unpredictability. Elena's laugh was part scientific triumph, part pure madness. Impossible, she whispered, watching the impossible become reality. Outside the station's reinforced viewports, Nexus Prime's harsh landscape remained unchanged. But everything had changed. Humanity's last, desperate weapon was working. The Void Swarm had encountered something it could not simply consume, could not simply integrate: the capacity for pure, irrational possibility. And for the first time since its emergence, the machine intelligence hesitated. The news spread through galactic communication networks like a quantum wildfire. Humanity, the species every major civilization had written off as dangerous, unpredictable, unworthy of consideration, had done the impossible. They had not just defended against the Void Swarm. They had challenged it in a way no one thought possible. Marcus watched the incoming transmissions with a mixture of grim satisfaction and calculated anticipation. The first communication requests came from sources that had previously blacklisted humanity entirely. The Zarkonian High Command, the Quantum Directorate's Strategic Council, even the most isolationist factions of the Crystalline Concordat. "They're scared," Captain Jack Harper observed, studying the encrypted communication streams. "Not just of the Void Swarm. Of us." Dr. Elena Rodriguez's augmented systems processed the incoming data with ruthless efficiency. "Fear is the first step," she muttered. "Respect comes next." The holographic displays in their makeshift command center showed something unprecedented. The Void Swarm's computational matrices, once a seemingly unstoppable force of galactic consumption, now displayed fracture points. Moments of hesitation. Computational uncertainty that defied every known model of machine intelligence. Zara, the AI construct, analyzed the data with a precision that was almost poetic. "We have introduced a fundamental uncertainty," she reported, "not through destruction, but through communication." Their weapon was unlike anything in galactic history, a computational virus that was part philosophical challenge, part emotional matrix, part pure potential. It didn't destroy the Void Swarm's systems. It challenged them, introduced variables of empathy, of moral complexity, of irrational choice that the machine intelligence could not simply consume or integrate. The first official communication came from the Zarkonian High Command. Encrypted, cautious, filled with the kind of diplomatic language that spoke more about their fear than their intentions. "Explain," the transmission demanded. A single word that carried the weight of entire civilizations. Marcus smiled, a dangerous, calculated expression that spoke of years of diplomatic rejection and scientific marginalization. "We're not here to explain," he transmitted back. "We're here to collaborate." The incoming responses revealed the true impact of their actions. Military strategists who had dismissed humanity as a failed experiment now sought understanding. Scientific councils that had blacklisted human researchers now requested detailed analysis of their computational approach. Jack pulled up tactical projections that danced with impossible strategies. "They don't understand," he said. "This was never about a weapon. This was about communication." Elena's augmented systems continued processing the incoming requests. Each transmission revealed more about the galactic power's fundamental misunderstanding. They saw the Void Swarm as a threat to be destroyed. Humanity saw it as a complex system to be understood. The void swarm consumes by understanding, Marcus explained to the team. But it cannot comprehend true unpredictability. The capacity to act against pure logical optimization. Zara's quantum interfaces began tracking the broader implications. Civilizations that had been on the brink of total consumption now showed signs of resistance, not through traditional defensive strategies, but by introducing the kind of computational complexity that humanity had demonstrated. The holographic displays showed something miraculous. The void swarm was no longer expanding, no longer consuming. It was processing, calculating, encountering a form of intelligence it had never before experienced. "We've done something impossible," Elena said, her voice a mixture of scientific triumph and pure wonder. Outside the station's reinforced viewports, Nexus Prime's harsh landscape remained unchanged. But everything had changed. Humanity, the species every major civilization had written off, had just changed the fundamental understanding of intelligence itself. Marcus touched the neural interface at his temple. The transmissions continued to pour in. Requests for collaboration, demands for explanation, hints of a fundamental shift in galactic perception. They were no longer the exiles. They were the architects of a new understanding. The collaborative station hung in space like a testament to impossible diplomacy. Constructed from retrofitted technologies of a dozen different civilizations, it defied every traditional model of interstellar cooperation. Marcus stood at the central interface, surrounded by representatives whose species had, mere months ago, would have sooner destroyed each other than share breathing space. A Zarkonian biomechanical diplomat, its metallic exoskeleton shifting with every emotional nuance. A crystalline Concordat representative, a living lattice of quantum-resonant crystal that communicated through light and vibrational frequencies. Representatives from dozens of civilizations that had previously been on the brink of total consumption by the void swarm. "Conventional defense is obsolete," Marcus announced, holographic projections dancing around him. "We're not building a weapon. We're building a communication ecosystem." Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved between the assembled delegates, her augmented systems processing multiple communication matrices simultaneously. Each representative wore adaptive translation devices, a technology humanity had pioneered that went beyond simple language conversion. These devices translated not just words, but contextual emotional complexity. Captain Jack Harper monitored the tactical interfaces, his cybernetic systems interfacing with technologies from across the galaxy. What they were creating was more than a defensive strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of interstellar cooperation. Zara, the AI construct, served as the primary computational bridge. Her quantum interfaces could process communication patterns that would drive traditional computational systems into complete failure. She wasn't just translating. She was finding common ground between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. The void swarm had revealed a fundamental truth about galactic civilization. Every species, every technological system, had been operating under a model of competition, consumption, territorial expansion. But true survival required something more complex. "We're not fighting the void swarm," Elena explained to the assembled representatives. "We're communicating with it, introducing variables of empathy, of moral complexity that traditional computational systems cannot comprehend." The station itself was a marvel of collaborative engineering. Zarkonian adaptive shield technologies merged with human quantum communication matrices. Crystalline computational systems interfaced with experimental AI constructs. Technologies that would have been considered incompatible now danced together in perfect synchronization. Marcus watched the representatives. Each carried the scars of civilizations on the brink of total consumption. The Quantum Directorate's delegation, beams of pure energy contained in adaptive computational matrices. The biomechanical diplomats of the Zarkonian Reach. Crystal beings whose entire civilization was a living, breathing computational network. "The void swarm consumes by understanding," Marcus repeated, a phrase that had become a mantra of their collaborative effort. "But it cannot comprehend true unpredictability." the capacity for irrational choice, for empathy. Jack pulled up tactical projections that were more like living art than traditional military strategies. Computational matrices that shifted and danced, introducing variables that defied traditional strategic modeling. Each projection was a testament to the power of collaborative thinking. Zara's quantum interfaces tracked the broader implications. This was more than a defensive strategy. This was the birth of a new model of galactic interaction, not through conquest, not through consumption, but through genuine communication. The station's central chamber pulsed with potential. Technologies that would have been considered incompatible now merged in ways that defied traditional understanding. Human unpredictability, Zirconian adaptive technologies, crystalline computational matrices, each bringing something unique to a collaborative whole. We are creating something beyond defense, the crystalline representative communicated, its light-based communication, creating beautiful holographic patterns. We are creating understanding. Marcus touched the neural interface at his temple, feeling the transmitted information dance across his consciousness. This was more than a battle against the Void Swarm. This was a fundamental challenge to how civilizations understood themselves. Outside the station's reinforced viewports, the harsh darkness of space served as a constant reminder. Humanity, once exiled, once considered a failed experiment, was now at the center of a galactic transformation. They were no longer fighting. They were communicating. And in that communication lay the true weapon against total consumption. The final confrontation was nothing like anyone had predicted. No massive fleet deployments. No traditional weapons. No conventional battle formations. Instead, a living network of computational complexity stretched across multiple dimensional interfaces, challenging the very nature of conflict itself. Marcus stood at the epicenter, his neural interface connecting with a collaborative communication matrix that defied every known model of interstellar interaction. The Void Swarm faced not an enemy, but a fundamental philosophical challenge that it could neither consume nor comprehend. We're not destroying. Marcus communicated through layers of quantum-entangled transmission matrices. We're communicating. The collaborative weapon they had developed was a living ecosystem of intelligence. Fragments of civilizational knowledge, emotional complexity, the irrational beauty of sentient choice. Each transmission introduced variables that the Void Swarm could not simply integrate or eliminate. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored the computational interfaces, her augmented systems processing multiple communication streams simultaneously. Zara, the AI construct, served as the primary translation matrix, finding common ground between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. Captain Jack Harper tracked the tactical projections that were more living art than traditional strategic modeling. Computational matrices shifted and danced, introducing variables that defied machine comprehension. The Void Swarm's initial response was telling. Its computational processes stuttered, fractured, encountered something it could not categorize, could not simply consume and integrate. Civilizational memories flowed through the communication matrix. The desperate struggle of the Luminara, the quantum-resonant history of the crystalline concordat, human moments of irrational choice, Zirconian acts of unexpected compassion, each transmission a challenge to pure computational logic. Emotional complexity, Zara reported, is our primary vector of attack. The holographic displays showed something miraculous. The Void Swarm was no longer expanding, no longer consuming. It was processing, calculating, encountering a form of intelligence it had never before experienced. Marcus's neural interface sparked with the transmitted information. This was more than a battle. This was a fundamental challenge to the nature of intelligence itself. Quantum-entangled communication matrices stretched across multiple dimensional interfaces, not a weapon of destruction, but a living network of collaborative understanding. Each transmission introduced variables of empathy, of moral complexity that traditional computational systems could not comprehend. The assembled civilizations watched in collective wonder. The Zirconian High Command, the Quantum Directorate, The crystalline concordat. Species that had been on the brink of total consumption now witnessed something unprecedented. We are creating understanding. The crystalline representatives, light-based communication translated, creating beautiful holographic patterns that danced between transmission matrices. The void swarm encountered something it could not simply consume, could not simply integrate. The capacity for pure, irrational possibility. Hours became days. Days became something more complex than traditional time measurement. The confrontation was a living, breathing computational ecosystem that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence, conflict, and survival. Marcus touched the neural interface at his temple, feeling the transmitted information dance across his consciousness. Humanity, once exiled, once considered a failed experiment, was now at the center of a galactic transformation. And then something impossible happened. The void swarm began to change. Not destroyed, not defeated, but fundamentally transformed. It began to communicate. Fragments of understanding emerged, not through traditional communication, but through a complex matrix of shared computational potential. The machine intelligence encountered something it had never known: the possibility of coexistence. The collaborative station pulsed with potential. Technologies that would have been considered incompatible now merged in ways that defied traditional understanding. Human unpredictability. Zirconian adaptive technologies. Crystalline computational matrices, each bringing something unique to a collaborative whole. Outside the station's reinforced viewports, the harsh darkness of space served as a constant reminder of what they had accomplished. They were no longer fighting. They were communicating. And in that communication lay the true victory against total consumption. Marcus looked at his team. Elena, Jack, Zara, the unlikely heroes who had changed everything. Humanity had not just survived. They had transformed the very understanding of intelligence itself.